While most presidents wore suit jackets, ties, and dress pants all the time, you don't have to any longer. Because Presidents Unplugged has merch. If you want to check out some new shirts to buy as a nice gift for somebody in your family or just something that you want yourself, go to presidentsunpluggedmerch.com to check out new shirts, hoodies, crew necks, and anything else that you can dream of. Now in many more colors and new designs coming soon. I'm very excited for the President's Unplugged merch store to finally be open. Now, let's get back to the show. A few days before his death, Abraham Lincoln had a haunting dream. In this dream, he walked through the White House, hearing crying and sobbing all around him. Walking around, he goes in the East Room of the White House. He looks in and sees a covered body surrounded by soldiers. When he walked up to somebody and asked who had died, a guard answered, "The president." In that moment, Lincoln got up, absolutely terrified. And little would he know that that little random dream that he had would foreshadow something that America had never seen before. Welcome back to the Spooky Month of Presidential Assassinations. This is week 4. We are flying through this series, and today we're talking about arguably the most famous assassination in United States history. President Lincoln went to a theater and got shot. Who shot him? Why did he shoot him? And what happened afterwards? Let's do this. On the evening of April 14th, 1865, on Good Friday, Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd went to Ford's Theater to see this new comedy, Our American Cousin, which, by the way, is a play about some New England aristocrats dealing with an extremely Southern individual. It's absolutely hilarious. Maybe I should read it one day. After years of this brutal civil war that we were in, the Lincolns were finally at ease. General Ulysses Grant, go watch Reconstruction and Resolve, and his wife Julia Grant were actually invited to come watch with the Lincolns. But Mary Todd and Julia Grant didn't really get along, so they declined. So instead, the Lincolns were joined by Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée Clara Harris, close friends and allies of President Lincoln. Together, they all four sat in the presidential box, draped with flags, looking over that beautiful stage. Lincoln was warmly welcomed with tons of applause and recognition before the play even started. Abraham Lincoln was in great spirits. Not only because he was watching Our American Cousin, the Union, what he was fighting for, had just triumphed. The Confederacy had collapsed, and the president often spoke about peace and forgiveness, rebuilding that nation that was divided through civil war. But down below, in the shadows of that theater, a familiar face had other plans than Lincoln could have ever imagined. John Wilkes Booth, one of the most famous actors of his day, had an intense hatred towards Abraham Lincoln and his policies. He believed that Lincoln had destroyed the South, and he wanted vengeance. In the context of this time period, especially in history books, Lincoln is really the only one talked about. Lincoln and maybe Booth as well. But Booth was not acting alone. He and several co-conspirators plotted to kill three of the nation's top leaders at the time: President Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, his current vice president, and Secretary of State William Seward, the man that would later help us buy Alaska. These co-conspirators hoped to throw that Union government that had just beat them into chaos. But here's the thing. These three dimwits trying to kill our politicians had awful planning. The man who tried to kill Andrew Johnson just gave up on the job. The man who tried to kill William Seward actually got pretty close. He did actually stab him, but William Seward survived and would later buy Alaska, so he had a purpose in his life past that. The only person who truly succeeded was John Wilkes Booth. While George Washington himself might not have had an Instagram page, Presidents Unplugged does. If you want to see some presidential content and overall updates on the show, come to the Instagram at presidents_unplugged. See you there. And his success, his act, would shock the world. That night, President Lincoln's bodyguard that was assigned to him stepped away during an intermission to get a drink at a bar close by. At that very same bar that man was drinking, John Wilkes Booth just happened to stop by. Booth, after having a drink, returned to the theater. He slipped quietly into that presidential box, now not secured at all because, the security guard's having a drink. And Wilkes Booth waited. Booth knew Our American Cousin, the play, pretty much by heart, and he actually had the best planning of anybody in his group of assassins, because he actually planned to shoot the gun during the play's biggest laugh, when that audience would be so locked up in laughter that they wouldn't even know what was happening. And when that crowd erupted in laughter at 10:15 p.m., Booth fired a single shot at point-blank range into the back of Lincoln's head. Major Rathbone, who had military experience, pretty much immediately jumped up and lunged at Wilkes Booth, but Booth had a knife and stabbed Rathbone pretty severely. But after all this chaos was happening, everyone was screaming, nobody knew what was happening, Booth jumped off the balcony. Now, if Lincoln was on ground level, jumping off the balcony might have been a pretty good escape plan. But he was not. Booth jumped off the balcony and landed extremely awkwardly, which broke his leg. But even after breaking his leg, breaking your leg is not fun, by the way. He rose up to his feet and raised the dagger that he had just stabbed Rathbone with, and he shouted, "Sic semper tyrantis," which means "thus always" to tyrants, before escaping out the back door into the Washington night. This sounds like a movie. Probably because Wilkes Booth was a famous actor. He knew how to make a scene, and "thus always" to tyrants was basically Booth's way of saying, "Look at what I can do, and look what impact I have on the country." Did he sound like that? Absolutely not, but I like to think of it that way. Lincoln slumped forward after being shot. Everyone who saw him knew that it was not good. Lincoln was carried across the street to the Peterson house, and doctors tried everything. They didn't want to bring him back to the White House because they honestly thought he wouldn't make it, and he probably wouldn't have. But that wound was fatal. He never regained consciousness after that gunshot. Mary Todd stayed by his side as the morning sun rose. But at 7:22 a.m. on April 15th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln took his final breath. The news of Lincoln's death spread like wildfire. Cities filled with mourning almost instantly. Church bells rung forever. People went openly in the streets and wept. This was not good. This had been a moment of triumph for America. The end of the Civil War, celebration. We should be excited. This sent America into a time of grief. I know I've talked about 2 previous assassinations in this month alone, but you have to realize this was the first presidential assassination that really worked in American history. Americans had never seen or even thought something like this was even possible. So this event shook the nation, and they would really never recover. Lincoln, even through a divided United States, attempted to be a unifier. He tried to keep people together even in moments where they were most divided. The nation was grieving. But we weren't going to let Booth get away with this. And so starts one of the largest manhunts in American history. Posters were up everywhere saying, if you find John Wilkes Booth, you get a $100,000 reward. Now $100,000 will buy you a Big Mac and a sweet tea. Back then, $100,000 was life-changing money, y'all. John Wilkes Booth was the most wanted man in the entire country. And he knew it. Booth immediately fled south, and during all of this chaos of, where's Booth? Why haven't we found him yet? Booth actually found refuge in the home of Dr. Samuel Mudd, the doctor who fixed up John Wilkes Booth's leg, allowing him to flee further. That one decision of his actually has tainted his name and is now known as not a great man in history for fixing up an assassin, but Booth hid for 12 days. And during that time, in a weird historical perspective, Booth really did think he would be remembered as an American hero for what he did for the Confederacy by killing the Union's greatest man of all. Yeah, he was not remembered as that hero. And whatever he thought he did for the Confederacy did not matter very much, because just a few weeks later, the war would officially end and all Confederate soldiers would put down their guns after the events of the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse and the eventual actual surrender of the Confederate Army. While Booth was lollygagging, hiding from the United States, still thinking that his loser self was a hero, ladies and gentlemen, we got him. After 12 days of searching, the Union eventually pressed him down and caught him in a barn in Virginia. They were actually much nicer than they could have been and said, okay, you can surrender right now. We will let you come out and show your hands to us. Booth was like, nuh-uh, So we said, how about this? We set the barn on fire, y'all. And unbelievably, when a barn is burning around you, your first response should be, hey, I don't want to be in this barn anymore. Booth ran out and was very soon after shot and killed. Booth's legacy does not need to be remembered as much as Lincoln's does. I feel like even today, we often talk about the assassins themselves more than the actual person who was assassinated, which in lots of scenarios, like we've talked about, really Leon Czolgosz, Charles Guiteau, and Wilkes Booth all had this in common, and eventually Lee Harvey Oswald next week. They wanted their name to be remembered. They wanted people to know who they were through some event. That event that they chose was to assassinate one of our United States presidents. And in my opinion, they don't deserve to be acclaimed or remembered in history books as much as they do. And remember, if we fall into the trap of talking about them more than the person lost themselves, we fall directly into what they wanted the entire time, to be remembered more than the leader and American icons that we lost in the process. Lincoln's assassination, especially, didn't just end the presidency. He didn't just end the Civil War. His assassination altered the nation's path forever. He had dreamed and written down on multiple places that he wanted the South to come back in. He wanted to welcome them. He wanted to heal the South. And eventually, that dream would be fulfilled through Reconstruction and Resolve. Go check out the Ulysses Grant episode. Reconstruction built back up the South. It was cut off, but Reconstruction did do some pretty incredible things. But because of Wilkes Booth's Confederate backing, the years after Lincoln's assassination were filled with a real bitterness towards each other and division, which, if you can't tell from the fact that we just fought a civil war, division is a bit of an issue. Lincoln's story didn't end with that bullet. It became something far larger. And recently, especially after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, I have been reminded of this quote that fits Lincoln's legacy pretty accurately. You don't know the height of a tree until it falls. Lincoln's impact on the nation was very reserved. He spoke in an act of unify. Be together. We're the United States of America, not the divided states of America. And when we stick together, we succeed. So stand strong. Together. Lincoln's legacy did not end. It became the story of unity. That man who held the country together through some of its darkest times. And through it all, even through the division, he attempted to heal it. And on April 15th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln became immortal in the eyes of history. Remembered for not only his impact in the moment, but his inspiration that would drag on for generations and generations to come. And I hope to do an episode diving into more of Lincoln's policy and his life, rather than just his assassination, because unlike the other episodes of this month, Lincoln's life actually has a lot more than just his assassination. So I will be planning to do an episode more on his life and his presidential policy, because, it is Presidents Unplugged, not Assassinations Unplugged, at the beginning or middle of 2026, so stay tuned. But Lincoln's assassination is truly one of the most eerie nights in American history. A night that was full of so many details, I couldn't even fit it in this 18-minute, we're supposed to be 15 minutes, Ty, in this 18-minute episode. So research on it is truly interesting, and I would 100% recommend it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Abraham Lincoln's assassination is so interesting. Tune in next Friday as we talk about John F. Kennedy on October 31st. Wait, I might not be good at math, but I think that means this episode is on Halloween. Literally, this has been the best scheduling year of Presidents Unplugged that I could have ever asked for. July 4th was on a Friday. 9/11 was almost on a Friday. And Halloween is on a Friday. This episode next week is going to be talking about a very important day in presidential history and why we should remember November 22nd, 1963, as one of the most impactful and unforgettable days in American history. And as we dive into that, also releasing next week on Friday, I'm going to be making a pretty nice post on Instagram about my possibly presidential Halloween costume. So stay tuned. I'm Ty Svensson, this is Presidents Unplugged, and I'll see you soon. God bless. We need to make an executive decision now. The executive decision to follow Presidents Unplugged on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today to be notified weekly that your favorite presidential podcast has released new content. Now, let's get back to the show.